suburban Eastern, an environment that has, over time, evolved some extraordinarily unique groups of Homo sapiens. But today, we observe a small tribe akin to a group of meerkats that gather together atop a small mound to watch, question, and discuss the current events of their city, their country, and their world at large. Let's listen keenly and observe this group fondly known as the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Hello, we're back. Yes, the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove podcast, where we talk about news, politics, sex and religion, and in particular, when it comes to politics, tonight we're going to talk about the Greens. So a small group of meerkats with an additional meerkat joining us on this episode, friend of the show, listener and patron, Liam. Welcome aboard, Liam.
Hi, Trevor. Glad to be here.
And also,
poor sucker that gives you money every week.
It's all part of the socialist enterprise that we're running here.
Right, fair enough. I suppose you are socialist because I haven't seen any dividends from it. So anyway,
Scott the Velvet Glove.
G'day Trevor, g'day Joe, g'day Liam, g'day listeners. How are you all?
And Joe the tech guy.
Evening all.
What, you don't want to insult me in a passing comment at all, Joe?
No.
Good.
Too easy.
Okay. Yes. Well, we've been threatening to do this for a little while, and here we are. So,
And it wasn't my fault last week, dear listener. I wasn't actually running away. My internet died.
yes. Despite having a tech guy on the show, we couldn't resolve it. So,
No, it wasn't his fault. It was Optus's fault. Anyway.
yes. So we're going to talk about the Greens, and in particular, over the course of years, probably, when we've mentioned the Greens, Scott has kind of poo-pooed the idea of taking them seriously as a party to vote for. Meanwhile, I voted for them at the last election and quite happy with that decision. And Liam, as a regular listener, and I take it a Green supporter, Liam, what were your feelings listening to Scott? What prompted you to call for this exercise that we're going to undertake?
So, like, my biggest peeve was really that I feel Scott's primarily aligned to what the Greens want to do. So I think supportive of sort of progressive tax policy, supportive of, helping the masses, supporting sort of the rich, that kind of thing. And then he'd be sort of agreeing, and then at the same time poo-pooing the Greens. I just couldn't, it surprised me. So I was keen to have a discussion around what was going on there.
Yeah. So really to try and see if we can convert or at least get you to spell out exactly what it is that stops you from voting. Because as we talk, Scott, it does seem to me that you are, at least at a policy terms, more aligned with the Greens than either of the other parties.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a fair thing to say. Now,
Right.
when I first started this exercise a couple of weeks ago, getting ready for tonight, I, went on the Greens website and I agreed with virtually everything that was on there. Now, does that mean I'm going to vote for them? No, it doesn't, because there's an old saying about Greens: they turn red faster than a frog in a blender, and that is something that does concern me somewhat. So I actually had a conversation with a Green activist up here on Sunday morning, who was very brave to be out in his green T-shirt and all that sort of stuff at our markets up here, and he was out there waving the flag for the Greens. Now, I actually said to him, I said to him very directly, I wanted you to convince me to vote for you guys as a genuine vote, not a party of protest. And he said, he understands why you would get that point of view. And I then said, okay, well, how can you be seen as serious and that type of thing? And he went into the argument over the ETS. And I said, well, that was the Greens' failing moment. That led to Tony Abbott, which led to the Tories being in charge of the country for, 7 or 8 years or however long it was. and he disagreed with me. He said that that by them saying no to the ETS and them having a fresh negotiations round with Julia Gillard led to a preferable package. Now,
Can I just
Yes.
interrupt just briefly? Your present decision on whether to vote for the Greens is because of things that happened with Julia Gillard.
Yes,
Which
it
is
is.
Right.
a number of terms back, for sure.
Right.
I know it was a number of terms back, but I don't believe they can be forgiven. If you want me to go back further, I can. The birth of the Green Party happened over the Franklin River Dam protest, which was a protest against a renewable energy production facility which is going to be built in Tasmania. Now, what was the result of that?
Well, along these lines, it's later
A minute. The result was that you had
the last 20 years. Like, you're pointing to like one instance that you're not.
I am actually pointing to something that did happen 40 years ago.
And like conversely, have Labor put a foot wrong in 20 years?
Oh God,
so like
they have.
The Greens have done one thing wrong, and you'll never vote for them.
The Greens have done more than one or two things wrong.
Okay.
They have done a hell of a lot wrong. But anyway,
So
the
Scott,
whole point is, just wait. I haven't quite finished yet. The Franklin River Dam would have given Tasmania 100% of its electricity from renewable resources. Instead, they had to subsidise the construction of an undersea cable from Tasmania to provide their grid with extra electricity that was generated in Victoria. Now, how did they generate their electricity in Victoria? Through burning brown coal, which is a hell of a lot more polluting than black coal, which is used to burn up here in Queensland.
So, Scott, all parties have done stuff that you would be angry with that led to bad consequences.
Yes.
And are you honestly suggesting that the Greens have done more and bigger mistakes that make it that you just can't forgive them, whereas surely the other parties have had equally big cock-ups? It's because you're not really a choice between the Greens and perfection here. It's between the Greens and another bunch of.
Yeah, I know.
I'd also stress
let's give Liam.
I would also like to point out. No, just hang on a second.
Scott.
I would like
I'm
to
going to mute
point
you,
out.
Scott.
You can mute you if you want to. I would
There we
like
go.
to point out that the Greens actually like to hold themselves up as some sort of sacrosanct, above contempt party, and they are not.
Okay, let's
Let's
pretty
hear from
deep at the
Liam, yes.
there. Let's hear from Liam. Liam, waddle through all that as best you can and respond to whatever aspects of that you want to take up.
Sure. I think there's a few. I think we've got the ETS negotiation with Gillard. We have the Franklin River Dam scenario, and then we've got probably the big thing of you primarily agree with all Greens policies at the moment, but you still don't want to vote for them. So I probably maybe let's address the third one, the policy argument at this point. I think if you agree with the party on all of their policies, this is what we want to do. This is at the the modern party, the modern Greens, 2023. This is what we're striving for. This is what our elected officials are pushing for. This is what everyone in the party is aligned to do, which you agree with. So it's sort of, it shocks me that you don't want to vote for the Greens, seeing as that's what we want to accomplish. And your own acknowledgement aligned with that.
I do agree with a hell of a lot of that they're saying. And, Max, whatever his name is, the guy that's won Griffith. Yeah. He was very impressive in Parliament when he was giving it to the ALP. He really tore strips off them. And I found myself feeling very dirty because I didn't disagree with anything he said. Now, that is the whole point. There is a world of difference between what they actually say and what they will actually do if they do get into government. Now, I don't think they're ever going to get into government right now, although you've got to say that they are taking away a hell of a lot of Labor votes, and the coalition appears to no longer give a shit about coming back into office. So it is possibly going to end up being a future of minority governments where the Greens are going to become kingmakers of both sides of government. Now, that I think is very dangerous because they are.
An agenda that you really want to see.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm kidding.
Okay, well, if you really want, if you really want, if you
He
really
said
want to
because
go
they're going to
through,
put in an agenda that you really want to see.
okay, do I want to see them get their rent controls up? No, I don't. Do I want to see them actually pare back negative gearing? Yes, I do. But do I want them to abolish negative gearing? No, I don't. I do want to see them actually pare it back.
I think we should probably, we're jumping around a little bit. I think
Okay, fair enough. Well, if you want to give me something and that sort of stuff, then you can direct where it goes.
Well, I think I'm happy to talk about housing. I'm happy to talk about sort of Max as a bit of a case study at some point. But I think maybe first there's the Greens as a majority party getting into government, and then your point around there being a number of small parties. That's perfect. That's kind of what I think the whole system was designed to be. Like the two-party system, I don't think anyone would disagree with is not, especially in America, is not performing very well.
It's not.
So we want to at all costs avoid the two-party system.
Well,
having
I
the
would
Greens
agree
there
with you.
forces negotiation, and the Greens are willing to negotiate. I don't think the Greens here are being, we're blocking the housing bill, but that's because housing is a massive issue for us and the voter base. And frankly, the policy is pretty piss poor. I think let's get into that when we talk about housing. But I think, it's forcing negotiation. And then, the results of that are Labor's already committed an extra $2 billion to housing, and now they're pushing for additional rental rights and rent caps. So it forces a negotiation. There's nothing wrong with sort of negotiation. It's not and then, there is a stonewall, there's this double dissolution trigger that's threatened. If the people sort of get frustrated with the Greens for blocking things like that, well, they can vote us out. But I don't think that's, if they actually push for a double dissolution, I don't think there's any way, shape or form the Greens actually lose out in that. Because I think
you'll probably see movement in the House of Representatives, though. I don't think they'll retain their 3 Brisbane seats. They'll probably retain 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, okay.
But I don't think
that's not where the Greens are blocking the housing bill, right? So they'd need to lose seats in the Senate.
Well, no, they'd lose. They wouldn't lose seats in the Senate. Oh, it depends. No, they'd probably end up picking up an extra seat in the Senate if they had a double dissolution.
Possibly. Anyway, it's not going to come out it's not going to fall out. The Greens are out of balance of power, really. And then,
no.
So I think my points to summarize is that having multiple parties is great. Having negotiation in government, great. So I don't see anything wrong with that at all.
No, and I don't disagree with you. However, it's I think that the whole argument that I would have with the Greens, and I said this to a bloke on Sunday that I was talking to him. I said, you've made the perfect the enemy of the good, and I said that about the HAF, and I also said that about the ETS. I said, you've made the perfect the enemy of the good. And he said something about that the whole ETS was flawed and that sort of stuff because it had something written in there that the government could end up being sued. Now, I've still got to actually talk to him about that and that type of thing just to find out exactly what he was mentioning about that. Now, if that was the case, why the hell didn't the Greens actually try and negotiate that out? And I don't know. It's one of those things. And I do believe that the Greens' fingerprints are all over the ETS and that sort of stuff being destroyed, which led to Tony Abbott and the coalition government taking office. So I do believe that the Greens have got to accept a certain amount of responsibility for that.
Scott, at the risk of the chat room howling me down,
well, I can't even see the chat room right now. So
that's probably a good thing.
Okay,
but. What would it take for you to forgive the Greens?
Oh, nothing would get me to forgive them. No, nothing would get me to forgive them.
What about a very long discussion on the podcast on Tuesday night?
I think I've already moved a hell of a long way because I actually read their policies and all that sort of stuff. And I did actually consider giving them my vote in the Senate, but I would keep my vote in the House of Representatives purely for the Labor Party.
Can I check who you did you vote Labor at the
Yes, I
last
did vote Labor at the last election, yeah.
Right, and they've never committed anything that was unforgivable of the same standard that the Greens have committed?
I'll have to think about that. They have cocked up a hell of a lot, and Anthony Albanese has been a very bitter disappointment as a Prime Minister. He has not shown any sort of courage or anything like that. So, and that is why the Greens are nipping at his heels and all that sort of stuff, because he hasn't shown any sort of real progressive fight in his system. And that is why the Greens are actually pinching seats off him, because he looks like a, what did you call him, Joe? Shit light and ultra shit or something like that. That is, and
That's
that
not
is
me.
right.
That's Juice Media. Honest,
Okay.
honest
Yeah.
government ads.
Yeah. Anyway, whatever it was, that is the whole point, that I think the ALP have actually cocked up very badly. Do I think it would be worse if the Greens got in the area and that sort of stuff?
Well, it's just about forgiveness, because you're not prepared to forgive the Greens for the perceived cock-ups.
Yeah.
But surely Labor, for example, has bigger cock-up at different times, and certainly at the moment with AUKUS and with stage 3 tax cuts and with their failure to do anything on secularism. Like, surely they have reached the point of committing an unforgivable sin similar to the Greens?
Yeah, potentially. That is right. But what actually terrifies me and keeps me awake at night is a Prime Minister Dutton. Now, that does actually scare the living shit out of me. Now, if you actually split yourself away from the Labor Party too much and you find yourself voting for something else, you could end up inadvertently giving power to the coalition, which would end up with Prime Minister Dutton.
That's
Not with
why-
preferential voting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why we have preferential
That's
voting.
our whole system.
I know it's the whole system, but if you have enough people voting certain ways, then you could end up carving off enough. You could end up carving off enough seats that leads to a coalition
No.
government.
If
No, that doesn't make sense to me at all. If you are
Okay, look,
if you're
that's
a
fine.
if you're a Labor voter, say for example yourself, and you find that you're getting inclinations to vote Green, you don't suddenly go Green, Lib, Labor, or like Lib, Green, like.
No,
How does that affect your preferences flow? If
Well, my
you
preferences-
are centrist shifting left,
Yeah, okay. My preferences, I tend to find an independent that's got no chance of winning 5% of the primary vote, and I give him my first preference. Then after that, I actually do something with my preferences, which usually puts the Labor Party ahead of everyone else, and then it's a fight between the Greens and the coalition as to who goes last on my ballot paper.
I just can't
but,
see a scenario
this
where...
whole complicated sort of preferential voting system, at the end of the day, your vote either counts for the candidate who came first or the candidate who came second. So if your independent's never going to win, why are you bothering with him? But
Well, that's the whole point. I only vote for someone that's got no chance of winning 5% of the primary vote, so they don't get any of my money. Because I don't actually appreciate the whole thing of candidates and that sort of stuff pinching my money. So anyway, I don't approve of government funding of political advertising and that type of thing. So that is
Okay.
why.
all right, well, there's that. But you can acknowledge the fact that if we have Labor voters who are shifting to the left, there's no way that Liberal gets in off that.
No, that's very true. They wouldn't. Yeah.
So that's not an argument, really.
It seems to me, Scott, that the rise of the Greens is really going to force Labor to be more left,
It will.
because
yes.
they're losing votes to the Greens.
Mhm.
That's what I see the vote for the Greens as doing, and it seems to me Labor needs to move left.
I agree
Like-
wholeheartedly. It's one of those things. Like, I know I made a joke before saying that greens turn red faster than a frog in a blender, but it wouldn't hurt if the ALP picked up a little more of a tinge of pink in their policies, because they are no longer the party of the working class anymore. They're now the party of whoever donates the most.
So if you
Probably more
vote,
purple.
But
Sorry?
they're who you're voting for as well. Like, why?
Yeah, I
on
know
earth,
I'm voting
apart
for
from
them
two-
because I've
two
already
historical
told you. I've
examples.
already told you what my main objection is to the Greens.
two
And
historical
you and Trevor
examples
bullhooed
about-
me because I picked up something that happened 40 years ago. Now it was a very old example, but that is why I can't move past them, because your patron saint of your party, Saint Bob and that sort of stuff, got to his position because he blocked a renewable energy project being built in Tasmania.
Yeah, but it's also like, that's the Greens party. I wasn't even into politics around Franklin River Dam. I don't know how long does anyone know how long ago that was?
That was 40 years ago.
40 years. Okay. For
1981
the
was
record, I wasn't alive.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I was. And, I remember at the time and that sort of stuff, I thought to myself, oh, this is good that that's actually happened. But, I didn't understand what it actually meant. Now I understand exactly what it means.
Yeah, like, all right. But that part, like, half the people who would have been in the party at that point in time are probably dead.
No,
Yeah,
they're
most
not.
of
It's
it-
Christine Mill and
most-
Bob
yeah, but,
Brown
like,
who are still
the Greens is
around,
probably
and they're still
predominant, like,
carrying on about they.
Most of the party is quite young. There's a whole new Greens party. Like,
I
like,
know,
well,
there's
all
a
right,
whole
can
new
we-
Greens party.
all right.
And that's the other thing too, is that a lot of you guys that weren't around and that sort of stuff, you have this fondness for the old Soviet Union. Now, no, you do. And there is a whole thing about communism and that sort of thing that a lot of the younger people don't understand, was that it was a very brutal dictatorship.
can we stick to the Greens?
Yeah, we can, but I was just making the point about that, because youth doesn't necessarily mean that you are more intelligent than those of us with grey hair.
I don't think that's what we're even espousing. I think
No.
there's look, I'd say there is the left is always more about, for the masses, better public services, better education, better health, fund them better. Like, let's get rid of this, neoliberal bullshit. So, you could maybe draw some similarities to sort of communism, but we're not pushing for communism at this point in time. We're just pushing for more left policies, more things to help out the working class. Like, this is, it's very far from communism at this point.
So Scott, the Greens' position previously, you're saying, because they're the party of protest, led to a result which was the opposite of what the Greens wanted. And you can't forgive them because of that. Like, because of their protest, we ended up with a situation that was anti what they were trying to ultimately achieve.
Yeah, no, that's happened twice now. It happened twice. It happened once over the Franklin River Dam, and then after that over the ETS.
And what are you worried about in the future? What would be the future version of that?
I don't know. I don't know what's around the corner.
Why
So I
don't we
couldn't tell you.
segue into the modern Greens debate that's in front of everyone's mind? So why don't we talk about housing?
Let's
So,
do that.
this is the modern Greens standing up for what we believe in. Previously, you've said that the ETS and Franklin River Dam were failures and you can't forgive us. So what are your thoughts on housing?
Well, I think that the whole thing about trying to, I think it was called regulate rent or something like that, was what they were actually espousing on Sunday. Now, what they were trying to do is get in there and regulate rents and that type of thing.
Yep.
Now, where it's actually been done abroad and those sorts of places in the United States. Now, what they actually found there was that you had a situation that in New York, they sold out. They sold a lot of their properties and all that sort of stuff, and they sold them to, I don't know, whoever could afford to buy them, which wasn't a hell of a lot of people. And those that did remain in the rental pool and that sort of stuff, they didn't actually do any work to them. They just let them become... They went from being landlords to becoming slumlords. and that sort of thing. That is the concern I have with that. Now I've still got to go do the. I've still got to go and have a further look at it, but that is a real concern if that is something that could actually end up happening, because you do have people that can't afford to buy something, which you've got to look after. And that is where I think that their argument for the public housing was absolutely right. Now, this is the whole point about the HAF and that sort of stuff that was pointed out to me on Sunday, which I've since read up on, and I find myself agreeing with them, is that if the share market's having a good time and that sort of stuff, you're going to you'll end up with extra money and that sort of stuff that's going to be available for housing. However, the share market's only having a good time when the economy's having a good time, which is not the time that you want to actually spend money on that sort of stuff on public housing. You'd actually want that to be available to actually spend when the economy is going down. Now, that is the whole point. That is what has made me really think about the HAF and that type of thing, because it appears to be set up so that you're going to have the spending at the time that you didn't need the spending to be done. So that's
one of many problems with the HAF.
Sorry?
I'd say that's one of many problems with the HAF, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's the major problem that I saw that stuck in my throat, was that you're going to end up spending money at a time that you don't really need to spend money, because you're going to have a share market making a hell of a lot of cash, which is going to mean that the HAF's got cash, which is going to want to be spending on public housing. So they're going to be out there they're going to be out there trying to find tradies and that type of thing at the time when the rest of the economy is moving up, when you should be actually not spending government money that time. You should be spending the government money when you don't have a booming economy.
Yep.
Anyway, that's one of the things that that's one of the things that I found myself agreeing with this guy on Sunday was, because he did actually point that out.
Yep.
Now, I've still got to analyze his numbers and that sort of stuff, but anyway.
Well, I think it's this is a very complicated issue, so it's very hard to actually,
which is why
as a layman, jump in and actually read all the reports and understand the context to know what is actually the best decision. I would say that the CFMEU has now joined the Greens in doing this. I'd say the ACT Labor has passed a motion to support the Greens in this. And then there's also a coalition of Housing, Legal and Welfare who've all signed letters to support the Greens in this. So I support you in doing your own research kind of thing. But just be wary that unless you're really going to get into this, it's quite a hard thing to tackle.
Yeah, I know. It's one of those things. Now, it could just be the old Tory in me just not wanting to go away, but I'm always nervous when the CFMEU backs something.
Yeah, that's probably, it can be, they're a construction industry union backing more construction. So that's maybe treat with suspicion. On your other points, though, the argument that rent caps will lead to, people selling. That's not exactly the worst thing in the world to have more people selling in the housing market, considering, if the houses,
so you'd actually be happy with it with a fall in property values, would you?
Look, I actually own a house, so look, it wouldn't be in my best interests, but I think, at some point somebody needs to realize that, if houses are outside the ability for most of people to buy, and wages aren't going up, the only way for people to buy houses is either the price to go down or their wages to go up. So
yeah, I agree. It's one of those things. It's something I have struggled with, because if you actually engineer a position where prices go down, that will lead to a reversal in the economy, because you're going to have people that are going to be paying for thin air on their house.
It needs to happen over time, but there are significant.
Well, I don't think it needs to go down. I think you've got to have a long period of stagnation and that sort of stuff in the housing market,
basically.
So that you then have wages and that sort of stuff, so that they would rise and that type of thing to enable people to be going there and buy their own properties.
Yeah, effectively, we need to stop treating housing as an investment vehicle.
Well, I agree. Although I've put my hand up, I've bought a house that's an investment property.
Yeah, I also have an investment property, so I'm not a saint. I hear a lot of these arguments in Greens forums and things, and they, saying landlords are the worst people in the world kind of thing, which I don't think is the case. And, how could you buy a house and rent to someone. My point of view is that as a person who was able to buy things, you had money spare. There's nothing wrong with buying something that is a good investment. So like, I'm not planning to shoot myself in the foot or throw money in the fire kind of thing. So if I've got capital, I'll use it to invest. And housing has traditionally been a fairly solid investment in Australia. So I don't really think it's I've done it myself. So I don't think it's immoral to go buy a house. I do think, that we just need to shift the legislation, decrease the capital gains exemption, negative gearing. I don't think should be there.
Well, I think that they've got to actually, curtail negative gearing, because I think if you do away with it overnight, you're going to have a hell of a lot of properties go on the market.
Yeah, I'm not saying that none of these things can be done overnight. You need to actually have
if you talk to the Greens, they can be done overnight.
I don't think that's
is that true,
policy.
or are they phasing things in, the Greens?
No, I don't think anyone of rational mind would think that we could just do away with negative gearing, instantly overnight. Like, the disruption in the market would be incredible. So no, and there'd have to be a lead time. Like, as the Greens, we're not stupid. There might be some members of the party who are somewhat more radical, but I think more sensible minds will prevail. So, and that's not even on the table at the moment. So, like, we're getting a bit sidetracked, right? I think you're on board with the fact that the housing market at the moment is terrible. We're arguing around sort of the Greens' stance on trying to somewhat fix housing, which Labor's not doing nearly enough for at the moment. So,
well, I just think they have committed to $2 billion in extra funding for it, which was as a result of the Greens negotiating with them.
Yeah, so that's a win for the Greens, though, in terms of
yeah, I agree. It's a win
yeah.
for the Greens. Now, it's just that they've got to actually work out what we're going to do with the HAF, because it is asked about right now, because there's money for it's going to come if the stock market's doing well, but the stock market generally only does well when the economy is doing well, and the economy is doing well, then you're not going to have a shortage of workers.
Yeah,
which is where the expense is going to be higher.
The main arguments I heard that sort of made the HAF sound okay to me was the fact that it was probably a long-term commitment to social housing over time, that the Liberals wouldn't be motivated to mess with should Labor fall out of government. So I think that for me, that long-term investment in social housing is something that needs to happen. I don't really like them. Like, if it is a way that they can ensure that funding continues to flow into social housing, good. But that's probably the only thing I like about the HAF.
I tend to agree with you too, because the Tories are less likely to pull it apart.
But that's the only sort of positive argument I kind of have for it. And if I'm willing to hear others, but for me, like, the whole mechanism, like, it feels, well, it's not just feels, it is wrong. This isn't how governments fund things, right? We didn't say, like, let's put 20 billion in the stock market and then we'll use the returns to fund healthcare, or like, let's put 30 billion and let's fix education. Why are we doing this?
That is the point I've made to Trevor and that sort of stuff on this podcast before, where I've said that you don't fund health, you don't fund education that way. Yeah. So that is something that was actually, I think it might have been in Max's speech. I couldn't tell you, but it was somebody or other had actually made that point, and I had to agree with them. Because you don't actually fund your health budget, you don't fund your education budget that way. You fund it through recurring expenditure. So it's one of those things. I think that I think we've got to actually, for those people that look back on the 1950s through rose-coloured glasses, saying how beautiful it was, I think they've actually got to look at the amount of Commonwealth money that was going into public housing back then. It was incredible what was actually being spent by the Commonwealth on public housing. So I do think that is something that we've actually got to reinvent. Now, if we are actually heading into a recession, which I'm not convinced that we are, but if we are, that is the time that they should actually be loosening up the purse strings and that type of thing. That's where they should be pouring money into public housing at that time.
So I feel that time is now, right? So we've got
Well, what, I
rising
don't.
house prices, rising rents, we've got a cost of living crisis, and we're committing 10 billion to the stock market and 2 billion to direct funding.
Yeah, I understand that, but if you actually went out there now when you've got a shortage of workers and that type of thing, and you had to spend, you'd end up spending a hell of a lot more money on the public housing. You'd end up with the cost per square meter of housing that's actually built would be higher because you have to spend a hell of a lot more on labour.
But you'd
Then what
create
would-
work.
Sorry.
So you counter the unemployment by creating jobs.
Yeah, which is what I was just saying before, that, if we're going to recession, that's when you've got to do it. Now, I'm not convinced that we're actually heading to a recession right now. So that is why I'd say that we've got to actually have a minimum spend on public housing. Now, I don't know what that is, but we've got to actually work out what that is as a society and say, how many of these affordable houses do we need to produce every year? So this is the minimum spend that we're going to go into. If the economy takes a downward spiral, then we're going to spend more money and we're going to double the number of houses that are going to be constructed each year.
I think that's
So-
fine. So, I think we're kind of aligned. I think now the debate is at the moment. So, the Greens have secured 2 billion extra funding. There's the HAF still going ahead with 10 billion in the stock market, which I don't love, but at least it's continued funding. The argument now centres on the increased the rent caps and then improved renters' rights.
Yeah, which the renters' rights are being considered at National Cabinet, aren't they?
That's what the Greens are pushing for, but Labor refuses to acknowledge that they can actually influence that. So I think.
Yeah, I know, but there
um,
was something that was reported in the press just recently suggesting that they were actually going to debate that at National Cabinet.
Yes, I think I saw something today actually. I think
Now,
the
my
idea
underst-
was that it might be like a only annual increase in rent, which is pretty much nothing.
Well,
I
an
think
annual
no
increase in-
land. Well, all right, so if you're doing a 6-month lease, it gets you some relief. But if you can have an unlimited rent increase annually, that's not much. I think most people who own a house probably are signing up for annual leases, and then at the end of the year you can do whatever you want, which is pretty much the situation now.
Can I interrupt with a fact check?
Yeah, go for it.
Just on the phasing out of capital gains tax concessions, the Greens are proposing to do that by 10% each year for 5 years to phase out that 50% capital gains tax. And then grandfathering negative gearing seems to be what they were going to do there. So
So if you've already got a negative geared property, you can keep it in there.
that seems to be what I've
Thanks, Trevor.
reading in this document.
Confirmed, we're not insane.
But you know what, Liam? It doesn't matter what all the policy talk in the world
This is just me venting now.
because Scott's not prepared to forgive what happened
40
in the
years ago.
past.
Yeah, I know.
What would it?
And
what can we do? I don't know how to stage an argument to combat that argument.
Well, you can't combat that argument. It's
Yeah,
just something-
that's what I mean. Like,
It's just something where I really had to
I've got
examine
one.
why I had a deep-seated hatred of them.
do you think you've been influenced by the media, Scott? Do you think you've been influenced sort of subconsciously or otherwise by the Murdoch press?
No, I don't think so, because I
Where-
don't read the Murdoch press.
Yeah,
it's very hard
but
to avoid.
it's very disparaging of the Greens as
I agree
idiots
wholeheartedly.
and as
It is far too disparaging of the Greens. But, if you then look at the United States, for example, and you had Ralph Nader, who was running at the same time that, what's his name, was running against George W. Bush. Now, he actually split the Democrat vote and gave Bush the election.
they don't have preferential
I know
voting.
they don't have preferential voting.
We do.
Yes, we do have
So
preferential
it's
voting.
completely
Yeah, I
different.
know it's very different, but that is the whole point. The Greens appear to be, across the planet, a party of protest, not a party of government.
In Europe, Greens have active roles in different
Yeah,
parliaments.
that's
don't
true. They do. But, you've also got to remember that Germany doesn't elect their parliament the way we do here. They elect their parliament based on a percentage of votes and that type of thing. So the Greens end up becoming kingmakers for different governments, and then they end up taking a part of the government.
Proportional representation.
Yes.
I think the kingmaker thing sounds like, the Greens with a couple of minority seats are somehow controlling the government as kings through some weird. That's not how things work. That's like if Labor has
if
like,
Labor was
we
very,
have a
very
voice, and then
if Labor
we
was
are able
very
to affect
close to
things.
forming government, and the Greens came along and said, "We want X, Y, Z,"
Yeah.
I think
As
the
in a
Labor Party would give
negotiation.
them X and Y, but they'd hold out on Z.
Yeah, that's great. That is how the system is meant to
2 out of 3
function.
ain't bad.
Yeah, we have succeeded.
Okay,
in
2 out of
pushing
3
Labor
ain't
further
bad,
left
which I
and more
agree with.
progressive.
But when you've got the Greens actually holding a gun to their
No,
head
but,
and
but
that
this,
sort of
this
stuff,
is the will of the
not.
people.
It is.
Sorry?
This is the will of the people. This
On
is
housing, yeah. Sorry.
people saying, well, I'm not for Labour's policies. I want the Greens' policies. So, 10% are going for the Greens, 40% are going Labour. Together, you make up your 50%. So Labour has to compromise on some of their positions to work with the 10% that wanted the Greens. Because the other
I tend
alternative
to
is,
agree with you there. However,
is to negotiate with the LNP.
Sorry?
But otherwise, you can negotiate with the LNP and pick up your votes with the LNP.
Well, I don't think they're ever going to go that far. But anyway, it's
But
one of those things.
It's an option.
It is an option for them to go that way, but I don't think it's going to go that way because the LNP are never actually going to entertain a conversation with the Greens
Can I try a line of attack here on your behalf, Liam?
against me, right?
No, a line of argument. Scott, what to you is the most vital couple of issues facing Australia that's more important than anything else? Like, what's the top 2 or 3 things that are really important that we need to get right in this country? Because where I'm leading to then is I want to see what the Greens' position is and whether it's worth forgiving them because of the importance of the issues. So what would you say is important? And maybe we can see a pathway to forgiveness if the Greens are going to support. No, seriously. So for me, something like our foreign policy and the existential threat, well, actually, climate change for a start. You could easily say that's the biggest existential threat that we've got.
Yeah, which is why
And-
I think the Greens deserve to be punished because they fucked up the ETS.
How can
Okay.
the Greens be punished for climate?
Because they have fucked up the
We're the
ETS and they
only
started
ones
their whole
pushing
bloody
an agenda
political
that
movement
agrees with
blocking
the
a
science.
renewable energy project.
Oh, a single
So-
project 40 years ago you hung up about. When
Yeah,
global
that's
warming
right,
wasn't
because
really
it would
even
have
on the
given
table.
Tasmania 100% of their electricity generated by
Labor is-
renewable energy.
Labor is
and it
not
had to come
doing
across
nearly
over from,
enough right now.
Yeah, that's right. They're not doing enough right
Yeah,
now.
and
because-
they won't. They will continue to not do enough until people in their base shift left.
Scott, do you think more Greens parliamentarians would shift Labor to a stronger greener
I've got
policies?
no doubt that it would actually help. Yes, it would actually shift them.
Then if you say, for example, climate change is the biggest issue, you would vote Green then because of what you've just acknowledged, that it's going to force Labor to go with stronger,
I've said I would
greener
actually
policies.
consider voting for them in the Senate, but not in the House of Representatives.
Okay, so what's the difference?
The difference is the Senate is where they are the strongest and that type of thing. It's just you've actually got a history of having to deal with them there, but we've never actually had to deal with them up there in the House of Representatives.
Well, we all grow and evolve. Why do we have to be stuck
Because
in what we've always done? Why can't we embrace? I mean, Scott, if the argument is, for example, that climate change is the most important thing, really important, we've got to get it right, and the Greens are going to help with that, then having them in the Senate and the House of Reps is what you would want. Even though it might be a novel concept, you would say that's going to lead to greener policies, therefore that's a good thing. And if you think it's really important, you would forgive historical stuff and you'd go, you know what, this is so important, we just have to do it and hope that this will lead us to a greener path. Does that make sense? Is that
I
Yeah,
feel
you're
like,
making
you know,
too much
there's a-
sense for me right now. So I've actually got to really think about that, because you are right that the Greens would actually help the Labor Party become a little greener. Now, as to whether or not that is an existential threat for the country,
the Greens still aren't going to be a majority. Labor still controls the lower house and the Senate, and they're forced to negotiate with the Greens. So there's no Greens holding a gun to anyone's head. I think the biggest argument
I think that anyone having the balance of power can hold the gun to their head.
at certain points in time, right? But if you keep holding the gun to the head, we go to a dissolution, like double dissolution. Everyone gets shitted off with them, and they get voted out. But the thing is that the Greens actually have the will of the people behind them on this. I think this. I'm quoting Max. but
I disagree with you there. I think to myself that had you have had it,
hang on? Let him
I'm
quote
quoting
Max.
Max on 74% of Australians agree with the stance Greens are taking that they need to support renters' rights and rent caps.
Yeah, I know. And I just think to myself that the whole rent cap and that sort of thing hasn't been properly thought out. It hasn't actually been looked at in a very cold economic light.
Well, I think that's one light you can look at into it.
Yeah.
And then there's the other light of people not
Of
being
what
able to
feels
ra-
nice and that type of thing.
No, people not having a roof over their head because, like,
Yeah, I
prices are
agree.
going up,
And
so
I
it's
agree that is terrible that people could actually not end up with a roof over their head. So that is why I think that's why I think to myself the whole argument has got to they've got to actually boost the investment in public housing.
So I think
So-
we're saying they need to boost the investment in public housing. Sure, that's going to take a while. And then we're saying we want rent caps and rent caps and I forgot the other one. For the next 2 years, it's not in perpetuity. Next 2 years to get through this point in time where we're in a cost of living crisis, possible, basically almost in a recession. So we need to fix social housing long term, short term, support people through this period.
So they're saying they want a rent cap for 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah. Pretty logical.
Very reasonable. Has the chat gone quiet, Joe? It was the last. Is the last one John? Was it
Last
the last
comment is
comment?
John, yes.
Right. Okay.
I can't see the chat at all. So anyway.
That's all right. It'll just distract you anyway.
Yeah, fair enough.
So, Scott,
Mm.
I just assumed, I just threw in climate change as an
And
example.
it is
was
an
the most-
existential threat to the whole species on the planet. So
Yeah. Is there any other issue that you look at as a voter and you think is more important or equally or just close to being as important? And let's
Okay.
see where.
what's
the next
the
important?
stage 3 tax cuts are offensive.
Yeah, well, I think you know you're going to lose at that one, don't you?
No, they are offensive. They are utterly offensive.
Okay.
Now-
And the only way that's going to shift is with voting Green, putting pressure on Labor to move left.
Well, it's one of those things. One of the arguments that's been put forward for the double dissolution was that this would give the Labor Party the option to knock them on the head before they actually came in, which is true. They could actually knock them on the head before they were legislated to actually start.
They could have knocked them on the head, regardless. They have majority. The Greens are willing to support them. They can do it at any point they like.
Yeah, I agree. But, Albanese rather stupidly argued and that sort of stuff that he wasn't going to do anything like that in the last election.
I think
that was-
I think
Sorry.
McAuliffe summed it up nicely. Where he's like, "You said that. We didn't really believe you."
Who said that?
Sean McAuliffe on one of his last.
Okay,
episodes,
gotcha.
but,
Yeah.
I can't remember what his show is called. Mad as hell.
It's one of those things. It's that is one of my big disappointments with the ALP is that they will not actually take those tax cuts apart. Now I understand why they actually supported them, because the Tories wouldn't actually split the tax cuts and that sort of stuff to actually give low income earners a tax cut. So they had to support them to actually get them through. Now, it just makes me wonder, did the Tories actually leave start times and that sort of stuff think to themselves, "Oh, if we win, we'll just knock them on the head."
I
don't think
no,
so.
and I also feel
The
like
Tories aren't going.
the giving the tax cuts mainly go to the rich, right? You put all
Yeah,
stage,
the
three-stage taxes
the
through and
stage
just
three
make it
tax
the rest.
cuts go to the wealthy people. That's right.
Yeah,
I will be
I
will
don't-
be a beneficiary of those tax cuts.
Yeah, and I don't even know why would you support that in the beginning? Like even
Okay, but
even if the lower
you had
income-
the Tories and that sort of stuff. They were talking about the tax cuts and that type of thing. So they actually wedged the Labor Party on backing in the stage 3 tax cuts, because they said if you want the tax cuts for the lower income earners, you got to vote for the stage 3 tax cuts. And so they rather stupidly did vote for those stage 3 tax cuts.
Because they were gutless.
Yeah. So is this on the scale of dams 40 years ago, or?
Yeah, is this important
Yeah.
enough that you will momentarily forgive them in order to push Labor to getting rid of it because of political pressure? Is it important enough to bring about at least a temporary forgiveness?
Yes, a temporary forgiveness is fine. I am prepared to forgive them temporarily, because I just think to myself, those stage 3 tax cuts are offensive. It is completely wrong. It is criminally insane that you're going to hand over the amount of money to someone like me that doesn't need it. And then
This might be a good way of thinking about it, Scott. It's just a temporary forgiveness. Put them on probation. Just give them one more chance.
I'd say like a temporary forgiveness around when you enter the voting area and when you leave is all that I'm asking for.
See, I cannot believe that you're that bloody head up about a single Green vote living in Rockhampton, because let me tell you, what's her name? Michelle Landry is going to win this seat without any difficulty at all.
No, I think there's the debate for yourself, but there's also the debate for everyone else who's sort of rusted on Labor voters and would never vote Greens, right? So I think the party is not the party that it was 40 years ago. Things have changed. We're fairly progressive, fairly reasonable. And, it's like a grassroots democratic party. So if you want to get involved and have your say, you can do it.
Yeah,
But
okay, that's fine. So if you keep going back to that 40-year example that I gave you, do you think
I'm
now,
not keen to, but sure. Yeah.
do you think right now the Greens would still be opposed to the Franklin River Dam, or would they actually pass it through?
I'm not informed on this one at all. But
Right.
I think your argument was around the fact that we were protesting some construction or something, and then we were held up because the Greens didn't want that. And then it sounds like Australia was forced to do some other far more inefficient means of transport or energy generation.
Yeah,
which is
they
probably less
generated
environmentally
electricity in
friendly.
Victoria for Tasmania, which
Yeah.
was generated by burning brown coal, which produces a hell of a lot more
But
carbon dioxide than black coal.
But today, isn't Tasmania generating
Well, they
renewable
now produce
power and shipping it
produce their
back
electricity
to
back to
Victoria?
Victoria, and
So you can't really talk about what they do today, because they would say, well, we've got enough renewable power generation from other sources, therefore we don't need the Franklin Dam to be dammed.
Yeah, I agree.
And the Franklin River to
That's
be dammed.
right. So
it's
that's
sort
now
of
dead. Yes.
Circumstances
It's now
of
dead.
Yes.
It's now completely
And
dead.
isn't it a change of priorities? 40 years ago, climate change was really only just beginning to be discussed. Whereas now we have a much bigger focus on that. And therefore, 40 years ago, the priority was destruction of natural environment. Whereas potentially now you're willing to wear the destruction of natural environment if it means not burning brown coal.
One would have thought
Joe,
so.
that's a really good point.
Yeah. I'd also say that I would say that the Greens are probably smarter in their decision making now. I think there probably would be members of the party that wouldn't enjoy, destruction of natural habitat and things like that. But there are more reasonable voices, and there'd be a debate on where the party stands with it. But if it was, a net positive for the environment, then, or Joe's point around climate change, I think the Greens would support it.
Well,
any
what
other
would you-
burning any other burning issues in your mind when you enter the voting box at the next election, Scott? Are there any other big ones at the forefront of
Well,
your mind where you're
AUKUS
just going to
AUKUS
go,
is
I'm
getting
voting
close.
because of...
AUKUS is getting close to the front of my mind because
That's
the more I
another thing,
read
they're
about
not
it and all
doing
that sort of
anything.
thing, I just think to myself, the Yanks are actually going to do much better out of that than what we are. You know, it's now there's talk of, you know, I think there's going to be 2 or 3 submarines available for us in 10 or 15 years' time.
Would be, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, like, I don't know.
And
I think
I
we're all
just think
agreed on
to,
this one. Is that,
I think to myself there that is it appears to be dragging us closer and closer to the Yanks and that sort of stuff to sign us up for a war with China, because they've set us up that we're going to have these long-range nuclear submarines that would be very capable of making it to the South China Sea to defend Taiwan. Do I actually agree that we should let Taiwan go to the PRC? No. Do I actually agree that Australian soldiers should be actually sent to fight over there? I'm not sure of that yet. You know, and I know Trevor's actually looking at me rather peculiarly there, but it's one of those things. I don't know what the right answer is there.
So just for the record, the Greens are quite scathing about
Which
AUKUS.
doesn't
So they say
surprise me.
AUKUS is one of the worst security decisions in decades, and Greens Senator David Shoebridge described AUKUS as reckless alliance cooked up by the Morrison government and backed by Labor, which compromises Australia's sovereignty.
Yeah, I don't know that. I
Strong
don't know that it
words,
actually
man.
compromises our sovereignty. It's
we're paying between 268 to 368 billion. To
no, we're
UK
we're
and
on
the
the we're on
US.
the hook to pay $368 billion now, and that's going to be actually a shitload of that money is actually going to be spent in the US to not only build the submarines but actually build a new production facility so that they can build more submarines themselves. So it looks like the Yanks have actually said, "Oh no, which of those dumb fuckwits can we actually get to pay for our new submarine making facilities? Oh no, we'll go down and get the Aussies to pay for them."
Yeah.
So that is the thing that I find really offensive about it. Now I know the UK is actually going to develop the AUKUS submarine. Is it? Anyway,
I feel we're talking a bit about this, but like we're just railing on AUKUS. You don't like AUKUS. The Greens don't like AUKUS. This is yet another thing that you're aligned with the Greens on, as far as is what I'm hearing.
yeah.
Worth a temporary cessation in your... worth a temporary
Forgiveness
reprieve, forgiveness.
for a damn 40
Just a
years.
suspension of your grievance.
Jesus Christ, you've forced me to have 3 beers over this whole conversation. So.
I feel you keep bringing up arguments that you support, like every example.
I know,
you ask
and
for has been AUKUS stage 3.
I've said to you right from word go that I found myself not disagreeing with anything of the Greens they had written.
I think that's the crux of this, right?
Mm.
You support, and why I was annoyed and came on here is you support all our policies and you won't vote for us.
Oh, that's right. I won't vote for you.
But well, it sounds like you might now, Scott.
It's one of those
It
things
sounds like
I
you
would
are-
actually
It
consider.
sounds like
I
you
would
have actually
actually
softened
I
a
would
little
actually
bit.
consider giving them my vote in the Senate, but I wouldn't do it now as representatives.
I think, you know, if you love the Labor Party, I think there's like a pretty solid argument around they're kind of catering towards more the right than the left at the moment.
Yeah, I
being
agree.
really super conservative. So if you want to push them back to the agenda items you want, vote left. Vote left one election, show them that you mean business, and then you can go back when they start properly actually, you know, listening to their base, which they're not at the moment, right? Like the Labor Party, I think, base is actually left of where Labor sits.
Oh, I agree.
Currently
Absolutely.
politically.
Absolutely, they are. You know, it's one of those things. I found it really. I wasn't ever an Anthony Albanese fan. I didn't like the fact that he seems to be wedded to fast rail and all that type of thing. He's one of these blokes and that sort of stuff that I didn't like. I was very pleased that Shorten won that first ballot and that type of thing. Well, Shorten won the ballot in the members, but he lost the ballot to the membership. So that is why Albanese was prepared to run that next time, because he won He won the ballot of the membership, but he lost the ballot of the party members, of the elected members. Now, I was very disappointed in Albanese the whole time. I'm not surprised that he is as disappointing as he has been. He's not been a strong advocate or anything like that. He has been very weak.
Yep, can agree with that.
Send him a
Send him a
message.
message.
I'm not prepared to send him a message. You know, it's
Right,
I
a
haven't-
strongly
Send him a
worded
message in the
letter.
Senate.
I
And
haven't
then
even
vote
I
green.
haven't
Message
even
in the
joined the
Senate.
party yet. So it's one of those things. I think to myself,
And stop tossing those bottle caps around
God's
there,
sake.
ringing through the microphone.
I just think to myself that you see the other thing that you probably don't know about me, Liam, is that I used to be a member of the LNP, and all those years and all that sort of stuff, I still voted for the LNP, and then it was only after Newman took an axe to the public service and that sort of thing, and then what really upset me about him was that you know, I wasn't even that upset that they did away with you know, the where you could go and get your gay marriage registered and that sort of stuff in Queensland. What really upset me was how they said that they're going to. They said automatically. They said, "Oh, look, by the way, we're also going to take away the rights of gay people to adopt children." And I thought to myself, that is really offensive. Anyway, that's why I left the LNP. But I just think to myself, am I prepared to actually be a member of the ALP and vote for the Greens? No, I'm not really sure of that. I know Trevor is, but anyway. Or are you still? Are you no longer a member of the ALP?
I didn't bother renewing it. Yeah, AUKUS. I sent them a nasty note when they wanted renewal, saying with stage 3 tax cuts and AUKUS decisions, no way. Put me down as somebody who has resigned for those reasons, joining a long list, I think. So I reckon we've probably now covered what you wanted to cover, Liam, with Scott. Are we kind of...
I thought it's like we could.
Is there
debate
anything else you
more-
want to add to
we
this?
could debate more topics, but I feel Scott's aligned on everything. So like,
No,
unless there's
it's one
something
of
we
those
can
things.
actually-
Liam, you and I are going to have a beer next time I'm down in Brisbane, because I think you're a very interesting person, but I don't agree with you. But you know,
But you
Well,
do. That's
you
the
sound like
thing.
you almost do.
I don't, like.
We're almost there. We're almost there. When you start talking about the importance of the issues and whether it's worth temporary forgiveness, it sounds like you're there for the Senate, just not the House of Reps. That's what it sounds like
and
to
that's
me.
right.
And see it. So we've achieved that much at least. So otherwise, I think we're just going to go round and round. Like it's in terms of policy, we're just going to agree. It's just this impasse of getting Scott to overcome his.
40 years
He's,
of anger. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's the big
That
one.
damn was a formative moment in your life.
It was very formative in my life, because you know, it's one of those things. It took me a long time to actually really understand the whole climate change thing. And then when I did, it was pointed out to me that the Greens actually were opposed to the Franklin River Dam, which was a renewable energy project. And that really stuck in my throat very badly. Anyway,
So before we wind up,
yes, I'm not going to vote for them, but anyway, yeah.
just a change of topic completely. It's not often we have a millennial. Now that Shay's gone, we don't have a millennial present.
She does turn up on this chat room every now and again.
She's not gone.
Well,
you make it
she's
sound
not
like
on
she's
the
dead.
panel.
Shay's
so
an active member of the Labour Party, isn't she?
she is,
Yeah.
yes.
I'd
so-
be interested to hear her thoughts at some point around why Labour and not Greens as well. But
Well, she did.
yeah.
Before I lost
Yeah.
the chat and that sort of stuff, she did actually agree with me with what I was saying at the time. But you know, yeah.
But so just as a millennial representing the millennial class, Liam, thoughts on other issues, other topics amongst your friends? You know, is there disgruntlement about baby boomers and the way the system's worked against millennials, or is there an awareness of the generational advantages that older people have had, that, you know, free university education, superannuation laws that favoured them, a whole sort of raft of housing laws that favoured the boomers as they went through the years. Do people talk about these things, or are you not? Do you go to dinner parties and talk about these things, Liam? Or
We just call them parties, Trevor. No. No, oh, look, I wouldn't say politics is talked about an awful lot. I'd say I'm more interested than most people my age.
Yep.
Yeah, so I will talk about it and discuss it with sort of different friends at different points in time, and you hear different points of view. I tend to hear more of a different point of view from sort of podcasts and I know the different channels that I consume media through. So
Yep. So whereabouts would that be? What sort of places, other than this fine podcast, what other trustworthy sources do you rely on?
Well, I started listening to there's the Greens podcast, which is it's good. It's probably has more of that frustration around boomers and generational wealth, and it also talks about Greens policies. So I think that's probably if you're a pretty keen Greens voter.
Do the
Yep.
Greens have a policy on an inheritance tax or not?
They have a wealth tax
Yeah, it's
policy.
a wealth tax. I think it's a
But I
4%
haven't
wealth tax on billionaires, isn't it?
Yes, billionaire wealth tax. I think 6% on billionaires.
Yeah.
No, that's
So-
based on their net worth, is it? Not the income.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Wealth tax.
You have to somehow tax worth, not income, because they don't earn income. Anyway,
Yes.
the other podcasts, I think you recommended at one point Decoding the Gurus is probably one of my faves.
Yeah.
Almost
Yep.
gone through their back catalogue. Fun fact, I actually talked to Matt at one point. I was doing some sort of research for work, and he was around sort of gambling. Actually, that is another topic we could discuss, but probably all aligned on gambling in Australia / Queensland.
Yes.
So I talked to Matt at one point because that's his expertise. And then the other one I'm really liking at the moment is If Books Could Kill, which is very American themed. It talks about sort of the pop science books of the last, I wouldn't say century, but last while. So things like Nudge Theory or, I'm trying to remember, The Secret, all those sort of pop science books that make it into
Oh, yeah,
mainstream.
yeah.
But they sort of like,
If books could kill.
so
Okay.
that's great. And they sort of take a lens around how there's sort of this like, I think the underlying sort of neoliberal grind mindset, just work harder and you can make it kind of thing. It's probably more pronounced in the US where there's like terrible structural issues, and, racism sort of inherent in the system that prevents people sort of just being able to bootstrap themselves up to wealth. So I think I'm actually on the lookout for more because I listen to quite a few podcasts and there's not enough coming out week to week. So if anyone's got any
Right.
recommendations, let me know. But they're probably my
Yeah.
picks at the moment. Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Have I convinced you on China?
Look, yeah, I think your points, made me see China in quite a different light. I think I think you take I think the argument is that they're probably similar in the US to throwing their weight around. So like nobody's a saint, but I think the way we look at, I don't think that's sort of portrayed nearly enough in our media that we sort of take the US as the sanctuary of democracy, and then China's
Totalitarian assholes.
communist state that's doing terrible things to the Uyghurs. And we don't see things in rational light. So you convinced me to sort of, I think, uncover that bias I had there. So I don't think China are saints, but I also, they're our biggest trading partner. They're far closer to this than the US. So there's some. I think Penny Wong talked about strategic neutrality at one point. And that would probably be the line I would take. We shouldn't be criticizing China or being on the front foot criticizing China. It's a stupid move, as we saw with all the cancellations to trade.
Well, Liam, it's been a pleasure having you on. This has been a different episode.
No, glad to be here. Thank you. It was good chat. And keen for a beer, Scott, at some point. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. We'll put you on the list next time Scott's in town for a Felon's Pizza and
Yeah.
Beer. So, all right. Very good. Well, dear listener, that was something different. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with another episode. Bye for now.
And it's a good night
You can all
from
say
me.
your goodbyes.
And it's a good night from him.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.